On today's episode of the GrowthX Inner Circle, we have Rohit.
I was an accidental implant. Hopefully I've done well, get them to where we are.
Rohit is a founder turned VC.
What is VC, for example, right? We are betting on the aspect to say that this will go big. We do not invest into businesses or founders saying that, you're doing what you're doing, continue to do what you're doing. There's no fun in that, right?
He built a Cloudnine chain of hospitals, which is one of India's biggest maternity hospitals and makes more than 500 crores in revenue.
Cloudnine in general, we have about 29 locations across 14 odd different cities and continue to grow at a great pace. We manage about 2,500 babies a month. We're by far the largest in the country.
Now, he's building PeerCapital, a VC firm looking to back early PMF companies.
Let's look at it. PMF. How do you even define it? And it's so vague.
Thesis on PMF.
In today's episode, he talks about his frameworks of picking great founders.
Some founders are great storytellers.
Yeah.
Some founders are very fussed about data. If there are folks who can actually marry the two, that's just brilliant.
The 3Ds of choosing companies.
So you have to have businesses which are defensible. You have to have businesses which have depth and which you can depend upon.
His insight into building sustainable businesses.
I actually feel that TAM is as big as a founder's imagination. But most people just say TAM and forget about some of these things. I think TAM, you have to focus on what is available really to you to service and be able to kind of build towards, right?
That's where you start from.
And the future of India's health tech industry.
Let's talk about healthcare. And what are you bullish about?
People do not understand the magnitude of our country, right?
Hey folks, today we have someone who has about 17-18 years of experience in the health tech and healthcare. He's a VC now, works at PeerCapital as a managing partner. Very insightful guy, leads with data, leads with insights. The plan is to lock him in this room today and chew his brain and extract as much insights as we can around what is it to build, what is it to be a VC, how do you evaluate startups and founders and everything around it, while also understanding his love for dogs. He's a dad to a 12-year-old, so we want to talk about how his kids and how kids looking at ChatGPT, and something interesting we were talking about earlier before the camera started rolling. So we'll do that. And with that, hey Rohit,
hey,
thank
Adhar.
you so much for being here.
Pleasure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here.
There are so many ways we can start the conversation. That's always very interesting. The start. How do you begin?
If I think back, and we just discussed which years we were born in, not to be disclosed on camera, but I think, look, if you cut back to today to versus when we were growing up, right? Entrepreneurship today is probably sexy, right? And people are very encouraging. Shark Tank has probably kind of helped. There is so much more seamless information across the world in terms of understanding who did what. For my beginning, Adhar, I actually come from a very enterprising family. So I think my family pushed me into who I am. I don't know if at that time a lot of families would have been encouraging of that sort. But it was more in terms of learnings that my dad had, my brother had, my mom had, to kind of say that, how do we kind of all do things differently and do more, right? So very early on, when I was 18, I started my first business, right? So don't ask me why or how or whatever. It was a great business. Actually, there's a lot of insights. Now, when I sat and figured out what went wrong, what went right, it's actually quite a number of things which fell into place for us to kind of do that business. But got exposed to those nuances really, really early on. And so you carry that entrepreneur bent of mind into everything that you do. I did finish my engineering, went on to work with some global majors. And in each of the tasks that I was given in those companies as well, always had that entrepreneur bent of mind to see that, am I getting excited enough, or is this the path that I want to take? Probably came from a little bit of sense of privilege to say that I can take the decision that I want to, right? I mean, it helps, right, to be able to kind of think freely. Like today, I've seen a lot of kids who come and say that, I'm taking a gap year. Like, can you imagine what's a gap year, dude? I mean, if you can't study now, you can't study after.
Yes.
But it is important to understand how each one's track can be built, right? I don't think it can be forced upon. So we've moved generations over to kind of, build this. We were talking about kids. I think, like you mentioned, you are in an army family, right?
Yeah.
My dad was not part of the army, but I'm sure he could have been a great lieutenant. But
was he strict or
very?
Very. Okay.
But somewhere I feel when we are bringing up our kids, right? It's like, I think we overcompensate. So I'm trying to bring my 12-year-old today as a friend. I don't know if it's going to come back and hurt me in the ass sometime later, or is it going to be like best thing that I did, right? So, but so far it's kind of, we're trying to be not what we wanted or we had or something like that. Not that we turned out bad or anything. We just turned out the way we are, but it's a very different world, right? So I think looking at all of those various things that go on in one's mind, the environment you are in, I mean, the hustle of Bangalore today, right? I mean, there's so much happening. If you were in a European country, maybe you would have thought differently, right? So it's very different. I think it has a lot of those factors also in terms, how you actually come about it. So I think entrepreneur, keep telling everyone, it's a state of mind, right? I think it's more of that rather than saying, I found something and then I want to go build, right? Yes. Most people actually know that. But how many have the risk appetite to kind of go and get it done? Right? I think it's probably a lot to do with that.
Was that something that led you to Cloudnine? How did talk us through super even before the name came up? I'm talking about it didn't even have a name. It was what was happening then back then?
It was a decision between my maternal uncle and my aunt. Basically, my mom's sister. They were always abroad, across multiple countries and such. Decided they want to come and camp in India to kind of do something in the mother and child space because my uncle is a neonatologist. Okay. So on my mom's side, Adhar, everybody's a doctor. So interestingly, a lot of these conversations used to come up time and again. And there was one such decision which I was not part of, to say that they want to give it a shot. And I was roped in at that time because I was doing some other businesses and I was generally kind of keeping myself busy. And they said that, hey, would you want to come and help us out while we put all of this together to also give the sense of how the business would run. Took it up as a challenge to kind of say that, okay, sounds interesting and let's try and do it. But the beauty was to not, didn't have a playbook, nobody to emulate, right? So the true essence of discovering something to kind of do was fantastic, right? I had actually set aside saying I'll take a year before I go and pursue my master's to see, okay, I'll go and help, right? But it was just so much to do, and we'll try and talk about it a little later, but in terms of the learnings that you had, you set out a plan to do. When it doesn't happen, what do you kind of do? Or when it does happen, how do you kind of anticipate how much of it can you actually expect, and how do you kind of manage that sort of an outcome, right? So there were a lot of bad days, but some great good days, right? So it started with a lot of those things. So full credit to the rest of the family to kind of have thought together to kind of put this in. I was an accidental implant, and hopefully I've done well to kind of get them to where we are. But it was like that. It was more chalo dekh lete ki kya hoga, right? It was honestly like that. And given again the kind of time we started, 2006-07. Very hard to also even find data. Like today, you will find a lot of inferences from data to kind of make your decision making and stuff, right? So think about, I keep telling a lot of entrepreneurs, how do you look at TAM, right? So TAM is something which each one can define. I actually feel that TAM is as big as a founder's imagination, right? Now, who are any one of us to say that an Apple cannot come and exist, right? Who is anyone to say that Jio cannot distribute internet at the price that it is, right? I mean, there are so many of these things which have caused a lot of ripple effects across the industry that all of us are benefiting from, right? So it requires that one sort of, catalyst to kind of set, the ball in motion, right? So I kept thinking that, okay, what is the TAM? How do we kind of look at it? And my correlation to that is if you can look at concentric circles or subsets of that, right? So there is TAM, which is the total addressable market. Yeah. There is SAM, which is a serviceable addressable market, which is more geography and location based. I actually feel there's one more in terms of serviceable obtainable market, right? SOM. Yeah. So this is fairly well known concept, but most people just say TAM and forget about some of these things. I think TAM, you have to focus on what is available really to you to service and be able to kind of build towards, right?
That's where you start from. Yeah.
That's where you start from, but quite often get confused on TAM, and we'll talk about Cloudnine. So tell me, in your mind, and you may know this, but take an educated guess of how many babies are born every minute in our country.
Every minute. We're growing at quite a pace. I think slowing down now. There's also very interesting insight of how if you draw a very weird line from somewhere from Kashmir and take it tangentially and somewhere in Orissa, and the rest of India, I think the rate is about 1 or 1.2 or something like that. Then, but above it's like
That you're talking about fertility.
fertility rate. So yeah, exactly. So I'm kind of correlating and trying to kind of just figure it out.
Wild guess, don't go mad. Take a wild guess. It's per minute.
Per minute, exactly. How many per minute? Like I don't know. Like
don't do urban rural divide. Nothing. Kashmir, Kanyakumari. Just say one number.
One number. Just I don't have any basis, but like maybe like 10 kids a minute or something.
Yeah, so it's actually 51.
51 kids.
51 babies a minute. I don't know if you have to be proud or ashamed of that number, but it is what it is.
Wow.
What that means is it's about 2.2 million babies every month.
Yeah.
Okay, which is pretty much like population of most European countries. So we produce at least one European country every month, right? So that's people do not understand the magnitude of our country, right?
Yeah.
The reason I'm telling you this is, if you talk about 51 babies every minute, 2.2 million babies per month, that can be my TAM for Cloudnine, right? That, okay, babies are being born on a pure vanilla basis, that's the TAM. But when you look at SAM, you go into SAM and figure out that, okay, I'm starting in Bangalore. I apply a filter of saying that a mother is possibly willing to travel about 45 minutes of travel time to reach a location of our caliber and repute, right? So that becomes a SAM. But more objectively, you then have to go and say, okay, I'm going to price it at a specific proposition. My service offering is going to be of this nature. Here's how I expect my customers to come and behave. Or here's what I'm actually able to offer to my customers and stuff, right? So that becomes your SOM. So if you think about it, today, Cloudnine in general, we have about 29 locations across 14 odd different cities and continue to grow at a great pace. We manage about 2,500 babies a month, right? We're by far the largest in the country in terms of organized and all of that. But think of the TAM. We're like not even like a fourth rounding off error of what that market size is, right? And this is where I feel you have to really kind of understand what are you building for, right? So this, again, you can go develop a lot of these things in hindsight and figure out how things were. But I think today's ability is you kind of look at the data and infer from it to say that, okay, what can I do? Yeah. There are some who will disrupt and create categories, but there are some who will actually come about and say that, okay, there is an opportunity. Can I make it better? Can I look at it differently, right? So I think the opportunities lies as all of these things. That's what we saw as Cloudnine, right? So honestly speaking, it wasn't beyond the one unit that we had set up to say that, will it even grow? There wasn't even an ambition of that nature to say that, this was just a passion project to say that, can we do something better? It's only after a few years, and again, having the liberty and luxury of, setting it up at 2006-07, where you didn't have pressures of today. Our second unit came up in 2012. So there was a 5-year window during which, I could actually go back, figure out what is a scalable avenue, how do you kind of do this. Capital management was such a hard task to do. Today, there are venture capitalists, there are private equity and all of those things. Back when I was trying to raise capital, there wasn't as much access to kind of figure out, okay, who's the right person to speak with, right? What do you kind of tell them? How do you kind of show a non-tech business as a scalable proposition, right? So even some of these aspects were like very, very hard to come by. And again, put it down to learning, understanding how people want it. It's a lot of discussions which led to kind of, finally creating a model which is scalable, sustainable and such, right? So I think this has largely been, the learning of, how we actually got about doing, what we are. Now it's in a great cookie cutter mode. There's a fantastic team which does all the heavy lifting. We persistently listen to the voice of customer. There's a tremendous amount of inputs which keep coming from them time and time again. Beauty is we're not in a business of rocket science. It's a very simple thing that we do. So anybody who's gone through a childbirth experience can actually come and give us like tremendous inputs, right? And we are actually trying to see how do we kind of calibrate and give them a better option, right? So it's a continuous learning process. As long as the system is geared up to kind of ensure that we know that we're listening to some of these guys and becoming better than what we are, I think we'll continue to like really do well. So that's in a nutshell of what we've been up to and how did it all start.
So Rohit, very interesting. Like you spoke about user behavior, you spoke about data. I'll park data for a while. Let's talk about user behavior. And there's something interesting happening in the childbirth system. So let's just talk about say C-section, right? So the world has I think a rate. I think it's about like under 15% or something like that. But India has like a weird, like almost double of the world average of C-sections happening in India, which is like becoming a problem now. Like I think even UN has kind of called out on it that, you know, don't need to be so many of them. And now, you know, backwardly now users essentially is how you look at it. Mothers and, you know, families are getting aware of it. Hey, this is not the way you want to go about it. Like they talk to doctors about, you know, how they want to go about it.
Right.
What are some, like, what were those insights? What were you listening into? How,
Yeah.
like, what did you figure out that, oh, you know what, this is not how anybody is doing it?
Yeah, so look, I think a lot of these data references are also borrowed practices and also inferences from what has been happening historically, right? Each time you actually have to apply different filters to say how should you look at that number, how should you look at a country like ours, how should you look at a city like ours, and make those inferences and figure out what's the right data set. The most important thing is, while everybody can talk about normal versus C-section, you actually have to talk about mortality rates, right? You know, how many deaths happened because of unsafe delivery practices, right? How has that number come down? Because these are not, you can't talk of both of them as separate dystopian numbers, right? It actually has a significant correlation. Now, because in the developed markets, they've been able to control the mortality rates, then they start trickling down into further nuances to say that, you know, where all can we start making changes. You can't just say, oh, because the world marries one number, why don't we also start with a number? It's almost never going to happen, right? Here, you know, the kind of food we eat, the lifestyle we follow, you know, the ambitious Indian citizen today, you know, why should anyone slow down to kind of have, you know, children early, right? Earlier, you know, like all of us have been into families where, you know, you would have like 5 kids, 6 kids and all that. Today, you know, having a kid itself is like a big discussion.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So people are delaying pregnancies, people are, you know, delaying the decision to kind of go the family way. So there's so many nuances which come to it. But please bear in mind, you also have to track the number of mortality, especially during childbirth, on how has that number come down, and you will be extremely surprised that that number has come down significantly because of all these nuances that you can build in to say that it's more important to save the mother and the baby, and that's how this, you know, interventions help, right? So it's not just one number. So that's the data at play. That's how, you know, the medical community comes together and say that what's the new normal. Of course, everybody will have a settling point to say that, okay, this is where we need to be. As long as there is nobody doing some of these practices to kind of, you know, benefit for you know, oneself, and these things get caught out here. We're not in a civilization where, you know, people say that, you know, ho gaya, let it be. We're not. We will question, we will challenge, right? And you cannot hope to kind of grow organizations if you don't have these nuances in place, right? So there are various checks and balances. There are ways and means of identifying how do you kind of make sure that no procedure was done without it being extremely required, right? So there are a lot of these checks and balances which kind of again give you that perspective to say that what you're doing is correct or wrong, right? So with all of that, you actually have to look at these numbers. So those numbers can be whatever they are, right? But it is important to look at this at a holistic view.
That's interesting. I didn't look at it that way.
Yeah.
I was looking at it more like, I think like a very engineering process sort of thing that, you know, hey,
and that is the problem, right? I mean, not just in childbirth, for example, right? We look at a specific thing and say, why can't it be better than this way? But there are so many other layers to peel off from that, and, you know, then actually be able to make those changes, right? So that's where I think we have to come from. Again, going to this whole TAM perspective, you know, SAM is what you actually need to look at. SOM is actually what you need to solve for. But we're very fast on the TAM to say that aisa kyun nahi ho raha hai, right? So I think it is very similar in that way, right?
Yeah. And I like, very interesting because I've seen so many founders. I mean, myself as an operator, sometimes you're just blinded by this one metric, one OKR. You're just kind of looking at it without realizing that, hey, you know what? What's really attributing to it? What are the other things that I really need to change? And why are we actually even over-indexing sometimes on just say new users or retention? Or like nowadays it's all about revenue. But
it should have always been about revenue. But I mean, look, eventually reality is that every business needs to do that, right? I mean, there is, I think somewhere it's got a bit misconstrued that you can actually build businesses which continue to not make any money, right? I think this is again little bit of too much of a Western culture trying to kind of bring it into that ecosystem, because see there are capital structures which allow for something like this, right? There are public markets which are very kind of more category creation, more sort of, you know, feature first sort of, you know, they're more encouraging of that. We're not that, right? I mean, you can see some of the big bellwether names which actually went in, and without semblance of profitability and proper revenue, you get beaten up. So we're not a market where I don't think we will churn as fast to kind of help in some of these learnings, right? It has to take its own time. It has to evolve. Are we evolving faster than most of the developed countries? Perhaps yes, right? But it still takes time. It needs a lot of these guys to come and say that I'm solving for convenience, I'm solving for comfort, I'm solving for so many other things, to say that at some stage I'll start making that profitable venture, right? But you're right. So if you are in Mumbai, or if you're in Kolkata, if you're in Delhi, if you're in Bangalore, it's very different ways of how you kind of look at businesses. But no, it's not to say that you have to take one path. So some people take a bit longer to kind of hit that stride. And hopefully I think a lot of the tech businesses here are kind of trying to do that. But again, time is of that nature, right? So if you're not able to kind of build in that avenue and find that customer proposition and customer love, you do kind of then wither away, right?
Yeah.
So the power balance is as such. If you are able to kind of survive, I like to kind of put it as, what do we look for in most founders, right? So it's, all things aside, if you can think of it as a 3D or a 3-dimension, right? So you have to have businesses which are defensible. You have to have businesses which have depth and which you can depend upon, right? So each one has, these are not, again, like, they're not sitting separately, but they are sitting collectively. There's overlaps, there are multiple things, right? But I think those who can demonstrate all three together, I think are poised for success, right? It may take time, it may take a little bit of traction, it may take a little bit of trajectory, but I think these three things are very important. So it's not just for anyone who's building something, it's even for someone who's in like a good job, right? That how do you kind of understand in terms of, if you have to progress your career in terms of what you're doing, you have to kind of go back, and if you think about it, these three key parameters again come back and tell you that, okay, just because of this, if you're able to do any of these things better, you'll actually grow, right? And it comes to that: defensibility, depth, dependability. It's just that.
Let's dig deeper on them. Like, think, for example, like for me right now, I mean, I'm assuming what they mean, right? But I want to hear it from you. Like, what do each of these mean? Like, let's talk about, say, dependability. Let's start with that. Yeah. What does dependability really mean? Like, for me, I look at dependability in a very simple ways. Like, do what you say you will do it by the time you say you will do it.
Absolutely.
That's it. Nothing more, nothing less.
Absolutely. So you have to have that one mantra. What do you exist for, right?
Yeah.
Indigo started, for example, to say that on time, every time, right? It's easy to say, very hard to kind of do in an industry where not arriving on time was like, it's fine, right? I mean, that's how it is. I mean, look, we're going up in the air and landing, we're happy enough, right? How do you kind of push the envelope on something like that, right? Or let's say some strong hotels who like the Ritz, who says, we, ladies and gentlemen, are serving ladies and gentlemen, right? So how do you kind of do some of those principles, right? So dependability is getting what you think you want to get, and how do you kind of do this time and time again. You also have to kind of believe that sometimes things go wrong, but you have to build that level of trust. And it's not just, I'm not talking of healthcare brands or anything, consumer brands in anything. For example, the entire mobility index of what Ola, Uber did, right? If the cab doesn't arrive on time, or the fact that drivers used to cancel at their own sort of whim, right? It removes that element of dependability, and then how do you kind of come back and win that customer, right? So in everything it is that. So you have to build that level of trust to say that, okay, there will be bad days, but I know what these guys are capable of doing, right? So that's how most big businesses, most useful businesses, if you think about it, works. Apple is now taking the whole privacy route, right? Saying that, okay, while others may do what they're doing, Apple is saying that, look, it's private, it's with you, right? So and they stand up to it, and they make you sign so many of those things. It meant they will possibly lose out on a lot of those database ad revenues and stuff. They said it's fine. We kind of we'll find other ways to milk our customer, but it said we will actually be dependable that way, right? So that is how it is.
Very interesting, because what, like, I think a subset of dependability is also a set of values. Like, you spoke about Indigo, right? And I did this analysis, I figured something out there, which is like a little gray area. Their flight time is longer, and how the F is it taking longer from Delhi to Bangalore for every other flight? Bhai, you have the same whatever, Airbus Neo or something, and that's very interesting. Like, I'm like, hey man, like, so now what you've really done is by being on time, you've actually increased your flight time, and then you're like, hey, listen, I'm early because I've actually told you I'll take 4 days to reach Bangalore, and now I'm here in 2 hours. So that's very, and we even as government, like, there's so many places that we have done it. Like, something that I find it very interesting because I came from a like NGO, like, non-profit sector, and we were teaching kids at risk essentially, and we were teaching them English and maths, and it's so interesting to see that how, early on, like, what you call as literacy, like the benchmark for literacy was way higher.
Yeah.
And then
we spoke about
this, right? Now slowly they have, like, actually reduced it, and that's where I think dependability also comes by having the same metric. I see a lot of times when I'm looking and analyzing it, I mean, I've do very small sort of VC things, like invest like very tiny amounts early on, and I look at how they are talking about graphs, and the early, like, the 1/3 of the graph is on some metric, and the graph is the same, and the second half of this is different metric altogether. And how is it making sense? It just doesn't. So I think that dependability is also,
you can also
about
marry it with, you're absolutely right? I think you can also marry it with a little bit of customer expectation. Because as long as you set that right, then you can work within this paradigm, right? So you're right. I mean, when you see it, Indigo does take longer, at least on paper, and they do arrive at the time they're expected to arrive, and then take a claim for it, right? So I think, and these are probably, see, when they started Adhar, it was a different thing, right? They changed the dimension, right? Now what they do, I mean, we'll still fly Indigo, not because they arrive on time, right? We don't, I mean, I don't think that's a parameter anymore, right? They possibly call themselves low cost, and it's really not, right? I mean, it's pretty expensive in comparison to all the other flights as well. So I think they established that hook. They have significant market share. So obviously they know what they're doing. But I think going back to that question, when you say that, if I have to arrive on time, think of all the things that they did, which has become industry standard today, right? Like, how do you kind of do check-in? If you're able to check in before and come, if you, what's the size of baggage that you have to carry? Think of all of that heavy lifting that they did to educate the customer to kind of, get them to where they are. Today, we have different paradigms of expectations because that's become the base, right? And that's what great companies do, right? They lift up the base, right? If, again, going to the example of Apple, people could have said that we're happy with the Blackberries and the, the keyboard wala phone. They said, no, it requires a different interface where, some of these screen sizes will change, the touch interference, touch will change. I remember reading this article about, how the users of that time, if you did a survey at that time, because they did not know how a touch screen would work, to say that the QWERTY keyboard is probably the easiest because you're used to it on your computer.
Absolutely.
You graduated from the typewriter to the computer to the BlackBerry and the devices which had that. If you think about it, Nokia did that entire thing where, you had to press the same button thrice to get the different letter, right? It's not like that stopped people, right? And, people used it. Did you ever think that people will stop communicating or something? No, they did use it, right? So I think we are creatures of habit. We will kind of, get to something wherever we find that it's convenient, and we'll start moving towards that direction, right? So I think we've seen that a lot of these things have moved. QWERTY came into the touchscreen itself and said that, it's the same dimension that we are trying to move today, right? So they did not follow the A, B, C, D, E, F, that sort of a thing. So I think it's a mixture of a lot of these things, and, then they become the norm, and then we expect more. Like today, if we can talk about Zepto, they said, who needs this 10-minute delivery? But the fact is that they are delivering so many. I mean, the business model, we won't get into that. It is what it is. But, if nobody was asking for the delivery, then we can say that, it's a complete disaster. But there are people asking for it. There are people using it, right? I mean, will that business survive? Do what it's, whatever. That's a separate discussion altogether. But they've now asked people to say that why should it take more than 10 minutes, right? So if it's, now there is a news that they're probably going to get into medicine delivery and stuff, right? So you are now telling everyone that if it is taking more than 10 minutes, you need to kind of question that, hey, why is it taking more than 10 minutes, right? So you kind of, even if you don't use it, because they made that so mainstream, you'll start kind of leaning towards that, saying that, if it comes as same day delivery, which was like considered great, it's like, oh, it'll take a whole day, that's how customer expectations are changing, right?
And it's beautiful, like the way and I am so bullish about India. Like there are opportunities to move, and always. But I'm like, hey man, this is so. I couch surf a lot, and I have a lot of So I had like somebody from Israel coming over and staying with me a while back, and he like I think he was a chef. He's like, you know what? I was trying to cook breakfast for all of us, and like, you know what? I'll let me do it. And there was, I think tomatoes were empty or something, and we're like, okay, let me just get it from Zepto. And he was just blown away by the UPI, the Zepto. Like, what? You paid without cash? And okay, what is happening here? Like, how did this happen? Like, does it happen only in this part of Bangalore? Or like,
Yeah, I know.
and this is so beautiful. And even what you're saying, right? This changes regulation. This changes government. Like tomorrow, when we need, what you call first responders, we want medical help. We'll be like, hey man, like, can I have all my Zepto folks actually having, some knowledge of medical science, and they can support us there, and suddenly you have like people being there in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
No ambulance in Bangalore is like, I tell people that I stay somewhere in south of Bangalore, and I say, please time your heart attack. If it's between 7 and 9 a.m. or it's in evening,
God bless you.
no place, don't even bother. There is you can't leave home. Like the road is red, choco-blocked on Google Maps, and that's about it, man.
Yeah, we're probably the only city where Google gets it wrong so many times.
Yes.
On maps at least.
Maps, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Man. So here is something that really came up for me, like what's I've been observing in our conversation. You spoke about processes, like Indigo, the moat somehow has become the process, right? How they're able to optimize that, and it's not one thing. It's usually an attitude.
Yeah.
Usually it is like how do you kind of look at problems and how do you kind of manage it. I'm sure even it's so true, right? In the medical science field, like when you're looking at surgery, right? There's a whole checklist, and then there is a whole process of how, I think, who's that person who has written a very interesting book around this subject? He's written about checklist, essentially, the checklist manifesto. He's the author for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you read the book. Very interesting guy. He was talking about how they actually were figuring out that.
Through it, yeah.
Yeah, I think in operations a lot of things were going wrong, and how actually he ended up creating these checklists, and they also realized something very interesting, by the way. You would get it. A lot of time nurses would do the checklist. They will come and say, hi, is your name Rohit? Are you here for this? They will just come and do that. Oh, you are. Okay, great, check. But then there are some checklists for the surgeon.
Yeah.
Like, did you wash your hands?
Yeah.
Now there is this power dynamic between a nurse and a head surgeon. She will feel really awkward to go ask him, and like, hey, did you, like, you with 23 years of experience and so many hours, did you wash your hands?
Yeah.
So then they're like, oh, you need to make a checklist and a process where not the nurse, but maybe the second surgeon, who is second in command sort of thing, is the one who actually asks, because there's more peer, sort of experience. They're like, hey, Rohit, did you just wash your hands, man? Okay, good, check. Okay, tick.
Yeah.
So that's so beautiful that, such processes and checklists really change the game. Have you noticed that, like, among the peers that...
Any scalable sort of customer proposition, either product or service, this is an essential core sort of, fundamental principle that you have to set up, right? It can be different for different things. And I think one true thing that a founder needs to do, or a group of founders need to do, is to establish this. If there is aspiration to scale, I think these fundamental principles, or the first principles, have to be resound. And I keep telling this, that you have to be able to articulate your vision really, really well, right? Today you and I may be kind of doing some of these aspects. Tomorrow we need to have the team come and do some of these heavy lifting, right? So how do you kind of bring some of these things if you are the only one who has the secret sauce, right? Like a chef can only be as good as his, the sous chef and all these other guys who come in and, help out to prepare what is the ultimate thing which goes onto the table, right? If it is just individualistic, it's not that it's bad, right? But then that becomes a niche. Then that becomes something which is very delectable, that, it's like a experience of sort, right? Again, not to say that it's wrong or right or anything, like people derive great pleasure out of being something like that, right? But you have to imagine that, okay, is that what you're trying to build? Or is it something for scale that you're trying to build? If it's for scale, it has to mean a lot of those things. Whatever's in your head has to get translated into saying that, how do I define these processes? And most often than not, you will find that while some things are possibly similar to a base level, everything else will be what makes you different, right? And that's how more businesses which will actually come about and be better than the next guy, right? We looked at so many in I'll give you this example. When during the heydays of food delivery, again in our great city, between Domlur Junction in Koramangala to the Indranagar flyover, there were about 38 food tech companies, food delivery, all of that, right?
Okay.
That was not the worst part. 17 of them were funded.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I saw that, and I thought I missed out on an opportunity, and good I missed out. But now tell me how many exist, right? It's probably one, two, right? Either some got consumed, some withered away, and all of that. Because it's about this. One is to say that okay, people are asking for this demand, but the other is to say grounds up, what is it that I can do to make sure that some of these things play. Capital plays a huge role. The ones who are able to attract capital, extend the runway, clean these things up, are able to kind of make these processes nuanced and then become better. Like even Indigo, going back to the same example, I don't know why we're talking so much about Indigo. They don't need that publicity, but if you think about it, when you look at that, right, from the check-in process to how they hustle everyone to get into the flight much earlier than anyone else, right?
Yes.
Like you will, and we keep telling everyone, right, if it's a Indigo flight, you need to be at the gate, like they don't say 20 minutes before, it's like 40 minutes before. They would have said, and if you see the screens, how they operate with Indigo, there is like 2 times they will do like open for check-in, after it's final call. And so, that hustle to kind of bring everyone, put them in that place. So, moving from block A to block B to block C, and, then getting everyone. So there is a lot of things which go on behind all of this, right?
Yeah.
So you have to establish this. Otherwise, there is no way you can scale.
And very interesting. Like you said that, it's the ability to attract capital. And that itself, like as a managing partner right now, like at PeerCapital, how do you look at founders? Like how do you, again, of course, the 3 Ds that we spoke about, but how do you actually look at them in a very granular way and say, hey, you know what, 2 food tech companies, there is something, of course, there's process that we discuss right now, and you kind of observe that in the way they operate. But what else do you look at that you're like, hey, you know what, this is the bet I would like to make versus same industry, same, what do you call TAM, SAM, SOM, same, pretty much everything same. Like what about the founder, and I'm not just talking about the individual there, but also the core team that comes with it, and the people. I'm just focusing more on the people versus anything else.
Yeah.
How do you what do you observe there?
Well, I think across all different levels of investment, from your small checks that you mentioned to large private equity checks, right? You can have a lot of data around it. You'll have everything, but I think gut factor is the most important, right? I mean, all of us are trying to figure out, do I feel good about this conversation, right? Do I think that he or she is worth the risk that is to be taken, right? So look, nobody has this crystal ball to gaze in and say that, will this become better than the next, right? But you are also believing in the founder's ability. So there are ways to draw comfort from some of those things. Again, it's different for different stages. For us at PeerCapital, we're obviously going in at an early stage, where, they have a little bit of product market fit. There's a little bit of customer semblance in terms of, how are they engaging. There is some nuance of, where revenue is going to come from. Even if there's no revenue, at least we know what are those trigger points which will actually help them kind of, make the buck. At a stage like that, please remember that there is a lot of fuzzy logic that you have to determine upon, right? It inherently comes down to founder quality. To say that, okay, as a single founder, as a couple of founders or more than 2 founders, how well are they, balancing each other out? Even for us at PeerCapital, right? Like what is the differences that we bring and, collectively become a greater force to reckon with, right? And that's how more founders need to kind of infer from, right? What is the ability to hire a high quality team? How have they behaved previously in their, probably the jobs that they held or, previous sort of startup that they did, irrespective of the outcome. It may have been a success or failure. It's about how do you deal with those situations is probably what makes you, right? So that's how we are trying to look at some of these traits to understand how each one needs to kind of think about it. But it almost always comes down to, how do you feel about the founders and what is it that they're doing? You're looking at soft signals, you're looking at discussions, you're thinking, how do they behave in social context? How much of it is natural versus how much of it is, because you want to hear say the right things versus actually kind of going back and doing it, right? So we have to do a huge amount of ref checks. We have to kind of a lot of these conversations to kind of build together that view to say that, okay, this is how we're kind of going about it, right? So we are, trying to put together a specific playbook to kind of see how do we kind of build this persona so that institutionally can we start developing a thesis towards, what are the right sort of founders. And this will be a mixture of data, it will be a mixture of time, it will be a mixture of outcome to kind of understand and infer from again to say that, okay, what did he or she do well and what did he or she do wrong? How do you kind of build that together to say that maybe can that be applied as learning for founders of the future, right? And also for us to kind of pick those traits and say that, this is why we like them, right? So we're trying some different things, but yeah, like you said, like you asked, it almost comes down to the founder. And like even in my journey, right, I keep asking, and Matrix was my first investor and hold them very, very dearly. There was no reason for them to kind of invest, right? I actually feel that it's a leap of faith. They obviously have stories to tell, but I actually feel it was a leap of faith to say that, okay, here's a team which can probably make a difference, right? We weren't the first ones on the scene to kind of say that, oh, we know how to deliver a baby. Babies were being born, right? So what was it that was different in our ability to kind of go deliver on that story, right? The visioning exercises I was kind of put through. To say that if you are thinking, because as I said there was no aspiration beyond the one to kind of grow, right? But then when that growth aspiration did come, how do you kind of again push the pedal to the metal, right? To say that, okay, can you get it done? So there are some who can get it done, there are some who can't. So if you do the SWOT and understand, okay, where are the weaknesses that you need to solve for? Strengths are fine, but most people actually need to focus on weaknesses to say that, okay, here's where I need a strong team to kind of come and build. So do you invest in them early? Do you invest in them later? At what stage? At what size? All of these things, right? It just adds to the dimension that who you are, right? So it's always like that. I think it does require a little bit of leap of faith. It does require a little bit of rub of the green. It requires some, different sort of, unknown forces to come together to make somebody successful. Obviously on the premise of, building something useful, long-lasting, and like we discussed, the 3Ds.
I'm going to grill you a little here, okay? So, sorry, man. But you said, there are these softer signals. Like, get specific, man. Rohit, like, what do you look at? Like, is there like something that like, hey, man, this ticks me off, or this is something that I observed and about the team, about them, Like, let's just focus on founders for now.
So, top of mind. Some founders are great storytellers. Some founders are very fussed about data. If there are folks who can actually marry the two, I'm not saying in one particular person, but as a combination also, if you can do that one is this brilliant, long form macro vision, I can write stories about what we want to do. There's another who's fussed about how do we get it done, or it can be the same person, right? So we are looking at founders who know, for example, we've met some amazing founders who can go to the 14th, double click on a particular Excel sheet and, figure out what's wrong, right? I mean, that's just brilliant to know granular detail of, where each single revenue, metric will come from is very commendable. Now, will that happen or not is a separate thing, but to have that insight to say that these are the triggers which will actually come in, it makes a lot of difference. So if you're a founder who's building something where there are, pockets of data which can actually come in, owning that data is very critical. You can't just say that I'll hire somebody who will come in and do it. It just won't fly, right? So having a hang on that, having a hang on, look, there is no way you can build a scalable business. And see, what is VC, for example, right? Like VC is, we are betting on the aspect to say that this will go big. We do not invest into businesses or founders saying that, you're doing what you're doing, continue to do what you're doing. There's no fun in that, right? You have to have a dystopian view to say that, okay, I will get like an outsized return on that. That means you have the ability to kind of, do more than what you're doing today. So that's what you have to kind of establish. So for folks, we are trying to look at, okay, what kind of teams have they built before, right? What's the quality of people that they've kind of hired? Have they worked with people who are, not from, let's say, Ivy Leagues or, but have still had great outcomes? How are they thinking of, for example, ESOP? Everybody says, oh, I'll create a 10% ESOP pool.
Yeah.
No, that's easy to say. At what stage, how? What is it that you want to bring? Are there again CXOs that you want to bring at the right time who will grow to like a co-founder sort of level? How redundant can you make yourself at what stage, right? These are conversations that you need to have and see, is there pushback? Is there something to say, I know everything? And look, honestly speaking, best founders need no guidance, right? Best founders will just go get the shit done, right? But you can't assume that, everything that we touch and feel on every founder on the planet is like that. So you have to kind of go through your works and kind of do this, right? So top of mind, these two traits stand out.
To talk to me about the storytelling bit. Obviously, like, because it's so obvious, like, obviously data is going to, you need to know the data, you need to, like, that's seems to me, for me, like, pretty, but like, why storytelling? Like, it's okay, if he doesn't know storytelling, theek hai na, kya dikkat hai? Like, there's no challenge there. Knows the data, knows the market, knows something, knows how to build, has a team, good. So what about that is important? Or like, where does that come from?
This is my particular hang up. Okay. I don't know if it possibly has that much of a weightage in terms of others. But I think it is very essential because look, if you are thinking of convincing another person, and this can be a customer, this can be an investor, this can be a team member, a lowly employee where, their job is to just come and, move an object from A to B. They still need to know, why am I moving an object from A to B and what does it mean in the overall sense, right? We spoke about TAM. I told you before itself that, who are we to constrain TAM? It's as big as the founder's imagination. But if it's in only my mind, Adhar, I'm not doing anything useful for it, right? It has to come out in the way of, visioning to tell you that here's why I need 100 people to kind of believe in this and for us to do it, right? Think of mobility, think of EV, think of, everything that we're doing. We just landed on the moon, right? It's one thing to say that, hey, listen, we need to land on the moon. But the other is to say that, every single individual of how many things of those components, right? I mean, we're looking at that it's some 1 ton spacecraft which has gone there. Can you imagine the number of moving parts it must have and how every single thing is critical, right? And I was just reading a report on why Chandrayaan-2 or, the Mars mission wasn't as successful, or at the fag end it failed, right? Apparently came down to like some 0.01001% error that happened in something, and that causes catastrophic failure for the whole mission, right? So things like that, if you're not able to kind of build with a larger purpose, then you will just get mediocre output, is my view. You always have to kind of make them believe that every single person is a CEO considerate, that every person has that role that they're playing, and they have to kind of get there. I keep telling everyone this example, and that the cost of repetition, think of how Disney's built the entire enterprise, right? I'm a big fan of, how they have done. Indigo is one, Disney is one, there's so many actually amazing examples that I have actually kind of, looked up and, said, we can build in this way. How does the entire theme park come about? And, they're immersed in the play and the characters that they are, and there's enough case studies out there if you kind of go about and say that how do they actually get them into those characters, right? How do they get them to start behaving that the minute they put on that costume, they imbibe that character, even from somebody who's sweeping the roads there, right? They are in play. How do you make each one feel important, right? It is so important. So all of these nuances, if you're not able to storytell, you will get mediocre output. It's not that there aren't other theme parks, right? But Disney World, Disney Park is the highest level of how theme parks are. And just say it's the happiest place on earth. You can't just say and do nothing about it. So it's as good as that. So you'll have examples like that. You'll have examples of small teams trying to do great stuff, right? I've seen some amazing entrepreneurs who are not in it to say that, look, I need to raise external capital to kind of derive satisfaction and say that I built something big. There's so many guys who bootstrap fantastic companies, brilliant business model. They'll work with 15-member team, but each one of them are able to pull in probably outcome of possibly 30 more, right? So that's the kind of thing, right? You work closely, you create that strong team, help them believe. I feel it's the most important trait that we need in a founder.
Very interesting. I looked at it from a very different perspective. Before you shared this, it was more from, do they need to have it extrinsically like have as a storyteller, but to, I think what you're
It does
saying,
help.
it does help, but I think what
That's
it
not the
helps
only
is-
thing, yeah.
Yes, that's not the only thing. There is more to it.
Oh yeah, you don't have to be like this great public speaker and all of those things, right? Yeah, you don't have to do some of those things. But I mean, it's awesome if you are. Like when we say external, even to address like a team of 20 people, or you know, eventually to become 200 people, you have to have town halls. You have to be able to kind of, you know, talk some of these things out, and it's not just one way, right? Like we're seeing a lot of our politicians doing like very one-way extempores, right? You don't engage in conversations. You don't, you know, that shows a different way, right? Possibly you are being trained to kind of say something, but when you are able to kind of, you know, are you able to push back? Are you able to like, you know, justify? It's not that everybody in every job, every situation is happy all the time. So how do you kind of address some of those things? Those are also important. You can't be a closed box thinker and say that, you know, somebody else will handle that. So it's not just about external. It's about externalizing beyond just 2-3 people is also external.
Let's go back 5 minutes back. You said a word. Let's look at it. PMF. I parked it. I was like, hey, yeah, we're going to talk about it. What is it for you? What does that mean? How do you define it? How do you look at it? And I mean, what's the, you know, thesis there?
Thesis on PMF.
This is very vague, right? Like a lot of people, like, hey, we have hit PMF. We've hit PMF in India, but in US we don't. Like, you know, you know, right? That there is enough and more. And then how do you even define it? And it's so vague, and there is so much ambiguity around it. At least from, you know, when I talk to a lot of people, that tends to happen. If you talk to only a few subset of people, then you know there is a common definition of how we operate.
Yeah. No, I think it has to be as different as it can be. I don't think it's a one size fits all.
Okay.
PMF in my mind is something where you absolutely know your reason for existence, right? To say that, okay, here's what I set out to do. Here's what I wanted to give my customer, either as a product or a service. And here's what my customer is saying, that this is what he or she wants, right? If you're able to establish that, I think it's a product market fit. It continues to evolve. It continues to be in phases. It continues to be different for different geographies. It continues to kind of evolve with time, right? That because, as we spoke about earlier, that, you know, foundations keep getting built. If you're starting today, you can't start again from the ground floor. You have to start at the top floor of what customer expectation is, right? That's how you are able to kind of establish what you are. So in my mind, PMF is something about saying that, okay, set out to do something. Have you been able to establish that? It's not about volume, Adhar. It's not about saying that, okay, I wanted to sell this to 1,000 customers, only 5 have taken it, right? It's fine. But has that been proven that what you wanted to kind of sell them as a product or service, have they appreciated that? Or is it something else, right? And that's what PMF is, to say that, okay, there is something essential to what he or she is doing. And that, then you apply the filter of saying that, okay, now with capitalization, what will it do? Will this help you scale? Will this help you reach that 1,000 customers that you wanted? Or is it something in terms of saying that I know what they want, I've got a hook, I need to invest on tech and other aspects to kind of help them get to more of where they are, right? We then get into LTV, we then get into, okay, how do we kind of go and deepen our wallet share? We get into so many of those aspects, right? You've done the difficult aspect of getting to a customer. How do you then go deeper? How do you kind of get them to do the word of mouth, right? I mean, I keep telling a lot of our founders that the best CAC that you can kind of hope for is word of mouth, right? Because that's you can't ascribe a value to it. It is expensive in terms of being able to acquire, but it's probably the cheapest in terms of being able to kind of, progressively get people to come and, participate in, right? It is that important, and everybody has to do it. Right, here we are talking of things which because those brands have done that really, really well, right? So I think for founders to kind of find that essence is what is PMF for me.
So let's take that from there. Let's talk about at PeerCapital. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, are you focused at something? Or Rohit, are you like specifically looking at certain sectors? Are you bullish at something? Let's talk about the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem. What are you like really looking at?
Yeah.
Healthcare, obviously. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, so we're three partners.
Okay.
So we're trying to, at this time, because we've come together for the first time to actually set this about as PeerCapital. So we're right now relying on our strengths in terms of health tech, fintech, consumer tech, enterprise, and SaaS across these three verticals to kind of establish where we have a higher right to win. This is the kind of work that we've done before. Even in terms of where we can access founders and where founders can access us, this we feel is our strong suit. So this is what, in terms of our primary sectors are. We are looking at other things, trying to build a view, but I don't think we have a clear established right to win in terms, what is it that we can do. We are investing at a stage like we spoke about in terms of early PMF, where we are talking about saying, can we add value beyond just capital as a commodity, and can we bring our large institutional experiences to kind of help you build the right way. It's not to kind of just share your posts or retweet your tweet. It's beyond that, to talk about some of these nuances, to say that how does organization building happen. If we are building for scale, what are those things that you have to kind of keep at, right? How do you build culture? How do you kind of define a lot of these things? Honestly, I can tell you, having been there, it gets a bit overwhelming, right? You invest, for example, looking at a founder from a perspective of saying, I like what he or she is, building today. But automatically you kind of also assume that they're great organization builders as well, right? It's hard to establish. You don't know, and that's what you should be able to kind of help them substitute with, help them complement with, help them kind of realize, to say how do you kind of build together, right? So this is what becomes important. So right now we are relying on our strengths to say these are all things that we've done in our past, and hence we want to be able to kind of be those peers for you, equals, as a matter of speaking, to say that this is how we want to help you build. We're building a portfolio of about 20-25 odd companies in our first fund. So we want to kind of keep it concise and also very clear. We've got some tremendous founders already building across all these categories. And it's on our website if you want to go take a look. I don't want to name names, then I'm going to get shot at. But very excited about the kind of people coming in and building today. If you think about the kind of the time that we are in, think about the quality of entrepreneurs who are coming in and building today, especially knowing that capital is scarce. You will find that people who are extremely motivated to kind of find that real true calling of why they're building, coming out to build today, right? So we are genuinely excited. Obviously time will tell in terms of how some of these things work out, but in terms of size, position, what do we do, which sectors, this is where we are.
Can I take the liberty of naming them?
One or two, why not?
Yeah, sure. Because I'm curious. See, the thing is, I'm curious about, say, I actually saw, while coming here, early in the morning, I saw One Impressions there.
Sure.
I was very intrigued by, how did that come to be? And what about that are you like really bullish about? Like, what about the creator ecosystem? Essentially, that's what they operate in.
Yep.
And why go that route? Like, what was some hypothesis? What some things that you look at?
So, I mean, they're a brilliant example to kind of think about something which was previously existing as, let's say, a very consultative experience or a service. Can you productize it? Okay. Think of what Google did with Google AdWords, right? Today, any one of us, if you want to go and talk about, AdWords marketing, improve our searchability, all of those things, you have no other thing than to go and, get into AdWords. Do you speak to anyone at Google and understand, hey, what are those things, right? It is a productized version of saying, okay, here are the keywords that you need. Here are things which are people searching for. Here's a value that we've ascribed it to. You can figure out basis your budget that, okay, I want to bid on this keyword or not. In a very simplistic manner. Obviously, there's layers to it. If you think of what a One Impression is doing, is also kind of saying that, okay, look, creators in the form of, let's say, influencers and others, right? There are the superstars in the world, the cricketers, the celebrities and all of those things, right? There are also people who possibly have far less following in terms of what they're doing, but the engagement is actually very high, right? So today as a young brand, you cannot always wait to kind of say that I need the celebrity influencer, because then you have to have budgets of that nature. You have to have an aspirational nature or a coverage, and we spoke about Sam, right? you need to be able to service that big dimension that, if you kind of do it as somebody as big as an influencer of that nature, can you even service it, right? So that is a growth again. But what can you do to engage with an influencer, let's say, who has 10,000 followers but has very high engagement? Where do you even get access to this? So this is what they have done to productize the entire thing, to say that I have a budget of 10,000 bucks today. Can I still use influencers or creators to be a avenue of marketing for me to find the right customers? Today you can. Through a one impression you can, right? So that is the change that they're bringing about, to a very consultative service nature, productizing it so that you don't need to speak to anybody. You don't need to have the hang-ups of celebrities. If you believe this is a medium which requires a little bit of hand-holding, that what a creator can do, beyond something that you just read about, beyond something that you just post about, it requires, let's say, a little bit of interactive sort of engagement. Can I be that solution for you? So if you go to One Impression as a platform today, you will see all the celeb names. You will also see a ton of names which you wouldn't have heard of, but they drive significant engagement, which is why brands want to work with them, right? So, and these are brands which are popular. These are brands which are upcoming. These are brands which are, unheard of, and it is that core essence that they are actually trying to build. And with that, what they've done is they've solved for scale. Consultative in nature was limited to individuals' time, access. We spoke about a particular opportunity where we could just go tell them and they'll get it done. But they are limited to their degree of network that they have. How do you kind of beat all of that and productize it? That's what One Impression has done.
Let's talk about healthcare, right? That's your strong suit. What are your hypotheses around, we'll break it down, right? We'll just look at what's happening in the healthcare. How is the user experience and what their demands are, that's changing? How is the ecosystem changing? And what are you bullish about? Like, is it the pharma side? Is it the tech side? Is it the insurance, and all of that side? I also definitely want to talk about even, I'm a customer, I use this services, but at the same time, I'm not able to understand, like, what's exactly, where are they building at? What are they really trying to do? Let's run through some of that. Let's start from just the industry and such.
Let's look at the industry overview, right? So I think for far too long, this has been the sort of button to press during every budget. 2.1% of the GDP. It was actually much lesser. Now it's come up to about 2.1%. If you think about most developed countries which we like to compare with, it will probably like 5-6x of what is the percentage GDP spend, right, in terms of healthcare in general, right? It has been moving up. It has become more strategic, at least for the current government who's been there for the last 2 terms, has made it more strategic to say that we're going to take the insurer route through the Ayushman Bharat scheme, right? To say that that's where I'm going to put a lot of my capital in. With that as a nuance, I'm going to build layers around it, much like what UPI did, or now with ONDC and all these other things, right? So they've taken that particular position and they're building towards it. And I think we will have to wait and see in terms of how some of the outcomes come through this. But at least the strategy is clear. Previously, that strategy was not there. Previously, it was just, look, we need a tick in the box for healthcare. I mean, obviously, I'm just dumbing it down. But it wasn't possibly seeing one channelized effort of saying where is investments going to, right? So that's a big change. Look at the private investment, for example, right? In the same PVC, it's probably about $5 billion which has gone into healthcare as investments. It probably represents somewhere at about 8% of overall investments which the country has seen so far.
Okay.
Right? So it's still fairly a smaller segment in that way. This includes pharma, this includes services, products, everything. So there is fair bit of room for the sector to grow. In terms of output during the same time, right? So one is input. During the output, healthcare as a sector has contributed about 18% in terms of output.
Okay.
So you can automatically presume that over quantity and quality, there is a little bit of quality in terms of how something like this goes about. Let's look at our unicorn table. 109 as of now, with the one recent addition. 7 of them are healthcare. So around 7-ish%. Again, if you look at the metrics of quality in terms of, all the usual ones in terms of revenue, profitability, access, growth prospect and all of that goes up to about 18%, right? Even just our unicorns. So there is actually goes up to about 22%. So there is that avenue to say that, when you do something right here, these are long, sustainable, scalable businesses, right? So this is one thing which will continue to grow in our country, right? So which means there's a lot of room to grow. There is still a huge, you mentioned even, there is a huge outlay on out-of-pocket expenses in how healthcare is covered today. Despite all that we are doing, there is still room for us to significantly improve, and hence a lot of innovation will come. So I'm bullish in terms of, innovation coming in services, innovation coming in just pure play tech in terms of being able to look at how you build transparency, you build access. Our country, has always been told that, we are a country where healthcare at least is always about an affordability angle. I actually believe it's about access. It's about access to information. It's about access to the right sort of quality. It's about access to knowing what you have to do. It may be information. It may be, so it may be prescriptive in nature. It may be curative in nature. It may be diagnostic in nature. But access to that is most important. And if you look at what, internet is, right? We're like, I think there's only one country, Israel, is probably cheaper in terms of, the per GB cost of data. Where I think 0.14 or 14 cents to the dollar is what is our internet cost. What that means from access to some of these things, right, is what is more important. So how can healthcare benefit from some of these things? The pandemic was a great leveler to kind of showcase how technology can be leveraged, right? Obviously you can't time some of these things, but I think if such a situation were to come, let's say 2-3 years later, I think we'll be a far greater we'll have a greater sort of anvil to kind of work on dissemination of a lot of these things. I think we still did, even when we did manage, I think as a country, we did far better than most countries in the world, right? And if you think of the size, we spoke about the size initially as well, and we do have the largest, we're the most populous country in the world. Again, a tag, I don't know if you have to be, what about. But the challenges that it comes with, right? We were able to overcome fastest, first, in a very transparent manner. I have seen when we were traveling, everything was on our phone, where people had to carry parchi in other countries. What is that, right? We don't do that. We spoke about UPI, we spoke about all of those, and fantastic platforms. You should, I would advise everyone who's building in the healthcare space to go and look up at the dashboards that the government has put out, right? The PMJ dashboard, for example, it gives you granular details of, everything from how many claims have been made, what is the claims ratio, what specialty is, claims at.
Wow.
Everything it is updated every minute on the minute, right? You can't showcase this across any country to say that, can I put out data like this? Now, what does this mean is, there is the promise of volume today, right? To say that there is a transparent layer of volume today, which we always knew, but we were not able to access. Can there be innovation to look at information of this nature to say that what can I do about it, right? Where are the gaps? We spoke about even, if even is taking a very different route to say that can I be an insurance alternative to kind of say that, hey, listen, insurance comes with its own sort of limits because cost structures have been built in a very different way. Can I do a zero-based game and completely change the way insurance is looked at to say we're a group of members, we're subsidizing each other, right? In its most fundamental form. Of course, you have to kind of, marry regulation with it and, go through all these necessary changes. But the idea was to say that I don't have baggage, but as a group, I can actually come and consolidate what is our requirements, right? And if you think about what is insurance, you are in the game of solvency. It's ultimately mathematical function of, how you can, if everybody had to have a scenario of this nature, how are you fulfilled for it from being able to fend for it, right? You have that pool, and then you actually go and say, how do I start building on the servicing pipeline? Kaiser Permanente is a great example, obviously built over hundreds of years. And when you build that, you were able to first build the membership. You were then able to build the entire institution of where you were able to service yourself. They become fantastic, healthcare organizations themselves. So it's happened over the number of years, right? that is the opportunity today to say that while I don't need to do that entire thing together, can I go and build service partners who will actually be able to do that, right? But as a consumer, think about it, right? We've always talked about saying, I buy insurance with the hope that I don't use it.
Yeah.
And when I use it, you're always fighting with the insurance company because you said that, look, we didn't make the effort to possibly understand what it has. Because again, we're coming from the hope that we don't use it.
Yeah.
And when we need to use it, we don't know what all it has.
Yeah.
And then again, customer expectation that we were speaking about are at laggards here because you thought you were getting something else.
Yes.
Insurance company said, but I told you you are not going to get it. So how do we change that? Can we give you something in plain vanilla to say that you want this, here's what we are giving you, right? So you set that expectation. So with even they say, look, we'll take care of everything. It means we'll take care of everything.
Yeah.
So maybe that is the way, like you said, you are a member of Even. So how do we get more people of this nature to kind of come and say that this is what I need, right? So you will see a lot of this coming about. Tomorrow, I think we will be a country where, we will have calamities, we will have some of those natural disasters happening. When you have some of those things, right, like you actually mentioned, we spoke about it in a different context of, let's say the Zepto guys being able to deliver something fast. If you are in a situation where, let's say there was a water-based calamity, right, flooding of a region, there is that population. If you are able to sensitize that, okay, the immediate outcome of some calamity of that nature is waterborne diseases.
Yes.
What are the drugs you need to kind of deliver? What is the stock check in some of those available avenues there, right? Today, if you are able to work with the transparency, that efficiency will become multifold. Now, all of us are happy sending medicines and stuff. Half of them don't get used. There is no one way to understand that, hey, do you need this? Do you need this, right? Who's doing that stock check? Nobody is doing. We're feeling good that, we were able to contribute some medicines and stuff, but was it really getting utilized or was it going anywhere else, right? Building these transparency layers are the most important. We had that with UPI, we had that with ONDC. I mean, it's early at ONDC, but it's getting there, right? You are seeing these sort of stacks coming in that is actually useful to kind of then harness innovation over, right? So very excited about what lies ahead in healthcare. Very early days, but yeah, long way to go.
So they're looking at kind of improving the average and making it simple for everyone by saying that, hey, we are taking care of everything. You only pay this much, everything is covered. That has a certain denominator. They're designing it for a certain India. What about the rest? What are some other interesting spaces, Rohit, where you see folks building, or do you see some gaps? Or not just that, but you're looking at, hey, this is how the ecosystem is changing. Let's talk about ecosystem and then we'll come back to, how it's being looked at. Where are the gaps essentially?
Yeah, in healthcare specifically.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the champ.
Yeah, no, look, I think one thing is, again, given the kind of age in which our population is, right? One is everything to do from a preventive angle. That just not enough being done, right? I mean, not from a services point of view or devices point of view or anything like that. Just in terms of, again, we spoke about, us being, humans as, creatures of habit. We are not incentivizing preventive healthcare, right? In any forms or means, be it, will our insurance cover go down if we are, looking after ourselves? No, right? Like, so where do some of those things fit? What are the opportunities to kind of, encourage preventive behavior? It's right now either employer induced or highly motivated individuals who are kind of doing this themselves. But as a system, are we geared up towards, doing something on the preventive side? It's not. And if you go deeper there, it's a mixture of services, devices, technology, access to nutrition, access to high quality sort of counseling, stress relief, for example, right? Mental health has been growing as a mad sort of sector, from a size perspective. But how many different nuances in terms of, how do you look at that problem differently has come about, right? Do you wait for it to become a problem and then you start going through the route of, prescribing medicine to kind of, put that aside? Or do you start looking at early signs and say, can I just do stress relief for you and, get you off that?
Yeah.
Right? So there are ways and means to look at it. There are some smart folks who are attempting some of these things. Again, problem in all of these things is, when does the inflection point come, right? So there is no merit in being very early in the game, only to realize that nobody wants to use that service or a product. It's about timing some of these things, which is why I think rub of the green goes your way. Which is why I think looking at some of macro trends is very important. It's hard in our country because we don't communicate it as much. So I think defining problem areas, understanding customer sets in terms of, exactly like you said, maybe even the insurance thing, right? Payer has always been the one who's defined outcomes, right? In terms of how he or she needs to be treated in a particular hospital or healthcare service. Now a payer always kind of fends for a lowest common denominator to say that, okay, I will only pay for a surgery of this nature, a consumable of this nature, a recovery path of this nature, if it's, a room of whatever nature and all of those things. Everything else is something you need to fend for yourself, right? And that determines in terms of, how a clinical process is also defined. Somewhere these need to change, right? To say that, okay, whoever needs to be able to do whatever they need to do, can they actually get that service of that nature, right? So that I think is opportunity. Even there are some other guys who are trying to kind of play in this field and say that, can I level this up? Preventive, again, from an OPD point of view, right? We spoke about, hey, I don't know where to go. Okay, I am covered. Where do I go? Right? That itself, the discovery process itself is so hard, right? There are one or two in the forms of like Practo and others who are giving you a very different view of saying, okay, it is feedback oriented, access oriented, how they're collecting different sort of insights from customers and other avenues to pull together to kind of index to say how can you go to a particular doctor, right? Google itself is doing so many other things in this, but when I'm gone and paid an insurance company, can they come and tell me that, hey, here's who you can go to, because this is the kind of work that we're doing, right? So these are all gaps that are there today, right? And most companies would do well listening to customers to say that where can I improve, because everybody does the hard work of acquiring that customer and then miss the fact that they don't listen to that customer. So I think brands do well where they actively kind of do this and take it back. So I recently read where Nitin Kamath, who all of us hold dearly, he spends an hour, I think a week, answering customer queries, right? Because he believes that's the best way to kind of do that. Even in Cloudnine, we actively do it, listening to the voice of customer, not just talking about it, like we spoke about a bit earlier, right? Some of the best things in terms of experience that we've done have come through customers saying, hey, you guys are doing all of this, but can you think of something like this? And for us, it takes nothing to do that. But it's such a delight. I'll tell you a simple thing, right? Like, so we consider ourselves a happy place. In most outcomes, it's a great outcome. And in one's lifetime, if you have to think about education, job, or earning your first paycheck, to getting married, to having your kid, these are some specific milestones in your life which you kind of hold dearly, right? So in something like that, automatically your level of happiness is very high. So we wanted our units to be a reflection of that and reduce everything which is causing you anxiety, and we make you extremely happy in what you are, right? Now, as soon as they were leaving the hospital, they are actually very happy within, let's say, their car or their transport vehicle. They are happy, but around them nobody knows, right? What do we do to kind of do that? Like how we make way for ambulances when they're coming. What do we kind of do to amplify their happiness all the way after all the way up to their home, right? So somebody came and asked us simply to say that, hey, look, my car's dirty. I just want to make sure I take my wife and kid home in a clean car, right? It was a simple request like that. And, the idea to that was to say that, why not just decorate the car also, right? Like we've seen everywhere, like newly married, they'll have that whole train and all that. So we said, hey, that's an interesting thing. Why don't we kind of make this a happy occasion? Because everybody understands childbirth, right? It's not rocket science again. So we started like a new car. We started putting tapes, balloons, and we also started putting a thing that,
baby on board.
Yes. Right? We're the first ones to do it. So, automatically around them, people are looking at them and you can see the glee in the eyes, right? Strangers.
Very
and suddenly they are more considerate, all the way up to home, right? Your neighbors know you came, all of those things, right? It just amplifies. It took nothing for us, right? But it just amplifies the entire experience.
Yeah.
And the goodwill it generates, it's so high that we started receiving complaints and we started doing this, in a fragmented way. It wasn't like a hare ke liye karenge or whatever. We just wanted to try and see it. That became a friction point later on to say that my car was not decorated. Right, so then this becomes a standard process, and you start implementing.
So beautiful,
right? So some of these things, and there's like so many things. We created something called at the I'll take a minute more. There was this avenue that when after the baby is born, the first bath is basically handled by the nurse and staff, right? Typically, it's not a well captured affair or anything. It's nurse goes, does in on book, that's what it is. But what happened was, father comes, he wants to necessarily capture that moment and all of those things. There are the siblings, parents, in-laws, everybody. Suddenly we thought that this was like a small echo chamber where the nurse is with the baby and all the equipment that he needs. It's a small nook where she actually kind of does this. People are crowding to like take all of these things. Like, hey, here's an opportunity. So we created something called the aquarium. So basically, remove the walls, put glass. Nobody's crowding the nurse, but you take whatever you want to take and store those memories forever. Right? It's called the baby aquarium because there's water. The baby's there, and you're looking at the baby there. It just became like that. So it again became a great way to engage, right? So it just shows that if you are listening deep enough, you can actually do a lot of things in a very, very meaningful way, right? And these are things which set us aside. And look, if you kind of relate to saying, okay, most people will have 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids at best, right? So these are not experiences you repeat. So when you are able to do that one experience, think of the compounding value, because this is a space, again going into what we do at Cloudnine, you will have an easy conversation up to, let's say, 2 years of the baby's age. Everybody will keep asking, right? How was your experience? Where did you go? Which doctor? What did they do? If you are able to build that word of mouth and build that goodwill, you will have, imagine having goodwill for such a long period that people will continue to come back and, say that, okay, this is where I want to be. It works both ways, right? Goodwill can easily be negated if you have a bad experience, right? And that's what you have to kind of, make sure that when you have something like that, how do you manage? But in the larger aspect of things, if you are able to build and compound on some of these things, that's what is important, right? So we spoke as a simple example about, finding the right doctor and stuff, right? Most insurance companies will do well if they kind of tell you, okay, I've given you the insurance. We want you to be well, right? Even you don't want to use the policy. How can I ensure I do that, right? Most of them, they don't even ask, boss, did you do a health check? Did you do something to say that, okay, you were at a BMI of this nature, you were at, let's say your blood gases were like this, you were pre-diabetic or diabetic or not diabetic, you're doing really well. Lipid profile was this. No one's asking, right? And even if they ask, it's a tick in the box to say, I did a blood test and that's how I'm covering you. They are not saying, am I looking at trends? Are you on the healthier curve? Are you on the curve to say that you will start requiring care of some nature, and here's how you kind of top that up. Somebody will say, like in cars as well, right? When we buy insurance for cars, they say, sir, extended warranty. I'm like, dude, why should I take extended warranty, right? It's like, sir, this is when the car will start deteriorating, right? So shouldn't you give me that without me asking for it, right? Why should it be optional? If you tell me that, okay, this engine part is going to start to deteriorate after 3rd, 4th year, shouldn't you like build that in so that it becomes a necessary thing? So like, no sir, we know, because the car has to be sold at a particular price. Because we're conscious about that price. And then you say there is a service element to it, right? In the service element, you have to look at all of these things. But in that industry, they've at least made it clear to say that, look, if you are taking this, we'll ensure that you don't pay anything out of pocket after that, right? But for health, we don't do it. When was the last time you got a health check done? Right? It's like that. It doesn't come natural to us, because again, creatures of habit, we need incentivization. Either we need danda or we need incentivization. It's like that.
So I made it a habit, like every birthday I gift myself a health checkup. So I also kind of keep those, as a report, so that somebody can at least have, it's all about data, right? So I can't have daily data, but I can at least have like a yearly and maybe like 6 monthly data. So, there is some sort of doctor can kind of look at it. It's very interesting what you spoke about the automobile industry, right? So they have a price point, but here is the thing, like, at least the insight that I was able to look at is till the time you're looking at cars, it's a commodity.
Yeah.
The minute you buy it, then it becomes my car, my asset. No, it becomes mine. Yeah. So that because it becomes mine, now I want the whatever coating, then I want the undercarriage thing, then I want the extended thing. Because till the time it's not mine, I'm always looking at it, oh, 4 पहिए और एक छत मिल रही है, उसके लिए how much am I paying? And like I'm looking at it like that. Oh, and then you're like, okay, now it's mine. Now I want to protect it. Yeah. Now I want to do this. Now I want to do that.
So true.
So it's very interesting, and even for like healthcare, what you said is so true, right? It's not just about childbirth, and I think in your you have up to like 5 years. Will they come back to you for vaccines? They'll keep
up to 2 years.
Up to 2 years. Okay. So that's again. So there is a relationship that you build with that family. So and you got to kind of design for that when you actually have the users coming in and trying your product essentially for the first time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's happening in the ecosystem beyond servicing? Like, servicing is the layer, or do you think like tech is the angle at which, because I think there's a constraint, right? So for example, I think doctors are a constraint for sure. Like India has so many less doctors, and I think we're even exporting doctors to other countries essentially.
Yes.
So how do you think, do you see some innovation happening there around how founders or startups are looking at it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one is, look, in terms of technology being able to manage some of these challenges, is that a problem? Yes. Are there solutions being created? Yes, right? Second is the adoption of such things, right? Now, it's not enough that you and me as consumers, we like what, let's say, our digital watch tells us in terms of, what's our, heart rate, or, is there arrhythmia? It's, it's not just enough. It needs a doctor to, come in and quantify that and say that, yes, you have this or you don't have this, right? That part is taking its own sweet time, right? And it's not that, people are averse against it or averse towards it or anything, right? It's just that, again, clinicians, obviously, there is that semblance to say that, anything that they say can change the course of your life, right? So they also have to kind of look at all sorts of data points to say that, how do we kind of build this from there, and not just because somebody said so. And in this case, somebody being technology. Having said that, eventually, if you think about it, it will probably require a generational change where it has to start reflecting from, let's say, payers saying, boss, have you used technology, right? Like you talked about the health records, right? Yeah. There is an initiative where you have to put all of these records in a particular way and format. And the government today, Adhar, you won't believe, is actually happy to pay hospitals to say that, boss, please generate digital records.
Okay.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, for anyone who's wanting to build in this, they're happy to pay digital enablers to enable hospitals, diagnostic services, anyone who creates health information, to create it digitally. Government is happy to pay the actual data generator, which may be the hospital, the lab, or whoever else. And if there is a digital enabler sitting on top, they also get paid. That is how the government is insisting. Again, like I said, incentive versus not doing anything. Government is insisting that, we will actually pay you to do this. That is very, very different, right? So people are looking at this as an opportunity. There are some fantastic companies. Eka is one who is actually building it. You mentioned that you are looking at, keeping all your records in one place. I'm assuming it's on a drive somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But imagine that you can actually have this in terms of a data vault, which is your health vault. That tomorrow, if let's say a doctor has to look at your history, it doesn't need Adhar to kind of go through some of these things, right? You can actually say that here's my Eka data vault, health vault, and you will get everything. So they are looking at your trends, they are looking at all of these things. Tomorrow, these data sets can actually become your ability to kind of work with insurance companies to say that, look, this is how I've maintained my lifestyle. This is how I've done some things, right? Can I get a better, product from you rather than a plain vanilla? I think there is absolute merit to it, right? So power of data, especially in our country, given the size that we are, is still very unknown. right?
True.
There are ways of looking at now. If you look at what is AI doing, right? Everybody is talking about training large language modules, right? It means there is data that we are looking at. We are creating inferences. They are looking at path recognitions and say that okay, basis these we will arrive at decisions.
Yes.
This is typically how healthcare also works. Doctors are also looking at inferences and outcomes to decide what is the course of action, right? It is not to say that a machine cannot complement on some of these things. It absolutely can.
Yeah.
You cannot ask machines to replace the decision making. It is to say that can I support? And that's where you beat the scarcity of demand versus supply on doctors. You don't have to necessarily mean that every doctor has to have a one-on-one interaction. It has to result in a one-to-many. That will only happen with the use of technology. And like I said earlier in our conversation, healthcare is not about affordability, it's about access.
Exactly.
In our country, it's about access. So the ways and means you can actually use technology to be able to bridge some of these gaps, I think are the most essential. And we are seeing a lot of these things happening. So I think in clinicians, there is one lot who absolutely can't, use technology to kind of make those decisions because they're good at what they're doing and continue to do what they do. There is one which is slightly in the middle, uses a little bit of technology because they know that okay, the consumers also or the customers also actually expect some of these things. There is a new crop which is coming, which is absolutely coming up on this. I think they will be the new sort of flag bearers in terms of how do you use technology, how do you become on par with somebody, let's say 50 years more experience than you, in terms of being able to deliver the same or similar prognosis, right? Same or similar diagnosis. All that will happen only with the assisted help of technology, not from a replacement point of view, but from an assisting point of view. So I think there's great stuff happening.
Yeah, there's happening in, I think, I see this happening even in law.
Yeah.
I see a lot of lawyers now carrying iPads and they have these tech where you can actually, scribble and it's available everywhere. They don't have to carry those documents.
Correct.
I see them.
You don't have to fetch from memory anymore, right?
Yes.
You can actually see that, and it's only about making sense of what is that language about, rather than saying can I quote a case law, right? It doesn't matter anymore. Yeah.
So this is very interesting stuff happening there, and I think look at EVs. In that industry, I'm seeing a lot of folks relook at how do they even look at the TAM SAM, how they actually look at how they want to service users. And then again, I think the nuance which is coming out here is that everybody's looking at slices.
Yeah.
Earlier we had that, okay, there's one insurance, everybody, you are this age, that's what you get. And now there are these slices coming out. There used to be a case that, if you have a two-stroke engine, works everywhere, and it used to. It wasn't the most efficient, and now you have this slice. For your use case, your city ride, hey, maybe an EV makes the exact sense for you, for this. It doesn't always true for everyone, but does, supplement and kind of complement there.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at even drones in industry.
Sorry, on EV, I think, so one is the fascination of how EVs are also coming from a impact on the environment point of view, right? I think that's the most easiest sell, right? But how many have actually gone back and say that, okay, hey, look, what goes into battery manufacturing, right? How many actually understand what's the impact on environment on battery manufacturing, right?
True.
So for all this while we've been talking about paper better than plastic, what's the nature impact? Plastic is more about discard.
Yeah.
Paper is easier to discard, but to create,
it's to destroy.
Possibly, at a similar sort of, criminal intent in terms, what we're doing to the environment, right? So same with EV. The input cost of something like EV and even the output cost, right? Like in our country, and we were discussing this off camera to say that, hey, listen, at what stage will recycling become important?
Yeah.
What is the impact of something like that, right? And I met a few entrepreneurs who are actually thinking that there will be an inflection point of that nature where you have to start solving for this, right? Who's solving for it today? Today, the onset of EV across a lot of these things from, and when I say EV, battery tech.
Battery
right?
tech, yeah.
Forget use case, moped, two-wheeler, fancy bike, car. We have now big lorries and semis also coming up. So if you think of the natural metals which goes into creation of these batteries, right? Harnessing that for, repurposing it for a higher kind of, yield on EV life is such an important aspect. Who's actually building towards something like that, right? We did a little bit of research to find out that some very few companies across the world who's doing it. Indonesia, for example, has taken the lead on something like this. Not a lot of people know as to why they've been able to kind of do it, right? In India, for example, we are the pharmacy of the world. We manufacture every known drug, vaccine, whatever it may be, right?
Yes.
We're very good at it. There is this opportunity to believe that even for EV, while we may have caught the EV train a bit later, in the ability to kind of do some of these recycling and stuff, we're very good at that, to kind of set up manufacturing outputs to say that, okay, if this is the technique, can we actually go towards it and say that, okay, I will help you process this? Because as a country, we may not be the biggest in terms of EV ever, right? But can you kind of make do with that to say that I will import these materials, I will recycle it for you and send it back to you, right? That's an opportunity, right? So there are so many such things which are happening, and again, inflection point is anybody's guess in terms of how some of these things will happen. Space tech, for example, right? You were mentioning drones and I cut you off. No. Space tech, for example, something that we don't understand, or most people don't understand. I mean, Chandrayaan, great example, and all of those things which have happened. Obviously, huge amount of fanfare in terms, the budget and being more cost effective than most movies that were made. But people don't understand that innovation is also happening from a frugality point of view of saying that, okay, we will work within these confines. Not to say that we can't kind of use this, right? I spoke to a recent entrepreneur where, they were working with, not India, but, looking at nuclear technology to say that how small a box can you fit nuclear tech into in terms of, fission energy, right? There are submarines which are nuke fitted. So obviously, the kind of shape and size you can fit it into. Now, can this become something that you can put it into, let's say, rockets of the future, that it can go farther, faster, and all of that, right? Or can you fit it into, let's say, remote locations where, people are now, I mean, for whatever reason, which I don't understand, for political gains, that people are setting up forward bases across wherever they are, right? Much beyond their countries and all of that, simply because they need to have stationed avenues of energy and such, right? There was this one use case where it said that for the US, they spend about $400 per gallon of diesel for everything which is outstation, right? So if they have forward bases, for example, in Guam or wherever else, right? The cost of maintaining that setup is very high. But if you are able to bring alternate energy, for example, like a nuke in a box, for example, right? Now, look, there will be people who will make bad use cases of everything, but in the limited view to say that can there be a better use of energy, if you can put it in a box and in their C30s and stuff, go just drop it in one place, can they become drone refueling centers? Can they become something else that people can use to kind of draw that as a power source, right? So many use cases. People are working on a lot of these fantastic avenues too. Again, I don't know, I'm nobody to kind of understand when the inflection point, when the political pressure of something like that, because nukes are nukes, right? How do you kind of build use cases around a lot of these things, right? Like drones were originally treated as enemies, right? You say, laws, rules, all of those things against it. Now, when you see the use cases, there are so many, especially in a country of our nature, with so many different variations, impossible to access so many, places. What can you kind of do, right? It's so profound. And maybe we can go with your drone.
No, we'll go to it. I think this is really beautiful. I think just looking at not just nuke in a box is like one fringe case sort of thing. If you look at EV tech, you spoke about how there are, in Indonesia looking at it, and I was thinking about how India has never been a shipbuilding place, but there was a time when India, like if there was a ship that's life cycle is done, it would come back, it would come to India essentially, and that's where the ship
decommissioned.
Yeah, exactly. All of that would happen in India, and it's very interesting that I was talking to a few founders of how they're looking at not just. They're like, hey, it's fairly complicated to extract value again from a used cell which is used, but how can we actually kind of push its value that yes, it can't probably drive your car anymore, it can't probably take that tempo or like a
can there be other use cases?
Yeah, so they're actually looking at opening it up. They're looking at figuring it out that how we can actually make like a UPS. India has like a huge a need for that. So they have like power backup sources for that. Again, so this what you're doing is extending the life so that by another 10 years technology can actually catch up.
Yeah.
So that you can actually do something useful with it versus like that's going to be a huge problem. The millions of batteries coming out, where do you dump them if you don't like really figure out what to do with it?
True. It's again similar to the nuke waste, right? Okay, everybody said nuke reactor and everything. Where do you dump the waste?
Yeah.
Right. So it's you're right. So I think the usefulness in again EV and battery tech, at least to the extent that I understand, is it can be stripped to the natural metals that it was comprised of, right? But there is a process associated with it, right? So and the usefulness of the extraction after that, what is the efficacy with which you can actually use that. So I think these things will evolve, but
Obviously,
yes.
But these are all great spaces for founders to actually be curious, for them to actually look at, hey, how do I actually build something? What are the gaps out there? It's been really nice talking to you, Rohit, like very insightful, a lot of energy, and a lot of like perspective shift on how you look at it from as a VC, how you look at it from a long-term perspective on building, be it on teams, be it on, we spoke about the storytelling bit, we spoke about, what it takes in healthcare, what are some insights there. And I think healthcare, like definitely, like for what you are essentially talking about are 51 babies per minute. We'll need something eventually to service them. And that's exactly, there's a huge bucket of opportunity there. Thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for sharing all of this with all our members. Yeah.
I know, I wish we can keep talking forever, but yeah.